This week on Quality Digest Live, managers apply ancient wisdom to the art of giving feedback.
Plus, we chat with Coordinate Metrology Society Chair Keith Bevan about CMSC 2017. That and more when we come back. Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for March 3rd, 2017. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
Yes, he is, and I'm Quality Digest publisher, Mike Richmond. You know, we're going to start the show this week with a topic that's been very much in the news. I think we all can agree these days. That's international trade. A nuanced and penetrating consideration of the issue can be found in the article, Why U.S. Trade with Mexico and China Couldn't Be More Different by Adams Nager, which ran in Monday's issue of Quality Digest. Now, Nager, he's an economic policy analyst at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, the ITIF. This is a nonprofit organization that offers, as its website says, independent, creative, and nonpartisan analysis to shape the public debate and drive an innovation policy agenda. And the matter in which this particular topic resides, in which it does reside, I think nonpartisan analysis is exactly what's needed. The political rhetoric, as we know, around trade, especially as it concerns the two nations that Nager covers in his pieces, is very heated. China and Mexico have been lumped together as enemies of U.S. commerce. They've been accused of aggressive economic policies that collectively seek to destroy American prosperity and rob the nation of its jobs. Yet, as Nager points out, China and Mexico are miles apart, both physically and ethically, at least according to the ethics of fair trade practices. To support this assertion, he offers three compelling arguments. I want to step through them with you, because these are really good arguments I think he makes in this article, and they deserve to be looked at and considered a little bit in unison. First, Mexico's manufacturing sector is deeply integrated with its counterpart north of the border. In particular, many Mexican firms are key suppliers for U.S. manufacturing, specifically, as we all know, in the automotive industry. Therefore, if U.S. companies choose to open new plants in Mexico or move existing ones there, in many cases, the output of these Mexican facilities ultimately will create value, some value at least, for U.S. manufacturers. On the other hand, when production operations move to or are launched in China, U.S. firms tend to reap far less benefits. It's an important distinction there. I mean, there's benefits that still redound to the U.S. industry manufacturing in Mexico, not so much in China. That's a big differentiator right there. Secondly, Mexican companies generally play by internationally accepted rules of fair trade. China, really not so much. Nager's company, ITIF, produces a ranking of nations based on the quality of their policies and institutions related to maintaining free trade and global innovation. In that ranking, Mexico ranks a bit lower in the middle of the pack. So they're not great, but they're not atrocious either. China, well, they rank second from the bottom in that listing. The ITIF considers Mexico an innovation follower, meaning that they don't contribute much to the global innovation, but they don't hamper it either. China, however, is considered an innovation mercantilist, which means that the country overall acts to severely harm and inhibit innovation across the globe. A mercantile approach to that, where they pretty much are going to do what's best for them to the exclusion of everybody else. Okay. Very different kind of framework from what those countries do in terms of world trade. Finally, according to the data that Nager pulled from the International Trade Administration, trade with Mexico does not contribute appreciably to the overall U.S. trade deficit, a little bit, but not much. Meanwhile, Chinese exports to the United States are approximately 5 times the value of U.S. exports into China. That ratio now has fallen a bit. It was as high as 7-to-1. So it's fallen a bit over the past few years, but it's still an incredibly one-way trade relationship. None of this should be taken as a blanket statement. I think that the United States trade relationships with China is awful, and the one with Mexico is great. Again, there's a lot of nuance here, and without question, the Trump administration is right, I think, to take a good hard look at trade with Mexico and China and the rest of the world. Nager's point, though, bears repeating against the backdrop of this notion that both China and Mexico are potential enemies of the U.S. in maybe in a coming trade war. They might be, they might not be, or one might be and the other might not be. I mean, it could go any way, but we need to remember that China and Mexico represent very, very different situations, and it requires really different approaches and different thoughts on how to deal with those two cultures in terms of how they handle trade. Interesting, our long article.
And actually, there's a lot of information.
A lot of information in there.
A lot of interesting charts and stuff to look at in there if you want to kind of take a deeper dive.
I didn't run a lot of that stuff, but there's a lot there to look at and consider. But I think it's fair. I mean, each country, in terms of its trade relationship with the U.S., is its own beast, and I think there has been some lumping together of China and Mexico as these people. And if you're not really paying that close attention, you could think both these countries are doing their utmost to harm the U.S. Not really so much. It's certainly not in the case of Mexico.
Right. Yeah.
So it's an interesting, important consideration to think about.
All right. Let's talk about feedback.
Okay. Give me some feedback, George.
Well, do you want negative feedback?
Sure.
Really?
See, I like negative feedback,
See?
you know?
Well, actually, strangely enough, some people do, but it depends on how it's given.
Right.
Negative feedback, let's face it, it's hard to receive because it's
negative.
It's negative, right? But it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be hard to receive or hard to give, and that's the premise behind Khatera Sahibzada's column, The Three Gates. Mm-hmm. The problem, as we've said, is that negative feedback, as we believe, is negative, and we believe that negative means painful. But if you think about it, we have all gotten critical feedback, negative feedback, that didn't hurt. That is, we didn't feel like we were being attacked. The critique made sense, right? And it used our own logic to make the case that we didn't perform as well as we could, and it was delivered compassionately, I guess you could say. And compassion, by the way, doesn't mean wishy-washy. You can be firm and be compassionate at the same time. When it's delivered that way, people will welcome critical feedback, just as you said, you'll welcome it. Sahibzada's points to one study of nearly 1,000 employees, both in the United States and abroad, that found that 92% of respondents believe that negative feedback is effective at improving performance if delivered appropriately. The problem is leaders forget about their own positive experience with negative feedback and think only about the negative ones, and they don't want to be that guy or that gal who has to deliver the critical feedback. I don't want to be the bad guy. In fact, Sahibzada refers to another study of 2,700 leaders. That's a big study, by the way, 2,700 people, in which researchers found that a majority of those leaders tend to avoid giving negative feedback, and 43% described it as stressful and difficult experience. So how do you turn that around? How do you make the job of being the messenger of critical feedback be less stressful? Well, Sahibzada gives us this ancient Sufi saying dating back to the 13th century. Before you speak, let your words pass through these three gates. At the first gate, ask yourself, is it true? At the second gate, ask yourself, is it necessary? And at the third gate, ask yourself, is it kind? So let's take a look at those. Gate one, is it true? Well, one part of truth is bias, whether conscious or unconscious. Our bias influences our views of others, says Sahibzada. Personal bias clouds our perception so profoundly that, and you all experience this, employee performance ratings often say more about the person conducting the survey, the review, than the person getting the review. In other words, truth can be obscured by bias. The key to curbing bias is to develop awareness and insight into our biases. And there's a lot of tools and methods out there to help us do that, but we shouldn't gloss over this. If you're going to give constructive feedback, it has to be based on facts and not on perception clouded by bias. Okay, gate two, is it necessary? Again, how often are you giving negative feedback, and is it necessary each time? Although you may be reluctant to deliver negative feedback, when you do, it should be measured and rationed. Also, and we can all relate to this, Sahibzada asks you to consider if your feedback reflects the requirements of the actual job or your personal preferences for how to do the job. And there's a huge difference here between what the job actually requires and just kind of, well, no, there's a better way to do this. there's a huge difference. Being critical of how someone is doing something may be unnecessary and not particularly helpful because it's based, again, on a bias, on a personal preference, rather than what's required for successful performance. And finally, gate 3, is it kind? You know, I was thinking about this one a little bit. I think, let's take it out of this context and put another context. There's another way to look at this. An analogy I thought of was a doctor delivering bad news. There's no good way to tell someone that a loved one is dying. But there are kind ways of doing it. And most doctors that I've met in these kind of situations, well, what do? Well, they're factual. They're to the point, and yet they still understand that what they are telling you is not easy to hear. In other words, they're not wishy-washy. They try not to dance around it. It's just, here's the facts, here's what's going to happen, and they deliver it in a way that's compassionate and caring. Delivery is a critical factor, says Sahibzada. Employees were most motivated to improve when they received negative feedback that was constructive and respectful and fair. Fairness in one study was defined as the extent to which the manager showed respect and consideration for a subordinate. So in other words, put yourself in their shoes. How would you want this information to be spoken to you? And you know what? I put this whole thing in the category of managing by duh. Right? I mean, this is just common sense, but we psych ourselves out by the fact that we're delivering bad news. And it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, this can be constructive criticism, right? And it's all in the way you do it.
Well, I love the analogy you used for that third gate, the kind. Is it kind?
Right.
Because as I was reading that and thinking about it, I was thinking, well, I mean, if somebody's not doing their job, it's hard to be kind. You have to lay out the truth. But the analogy of the doctor giving a patient bad news is really a good one. I mean, yes, you need to be honest. You need to say what the problem is, and you need to let that person know what the situation really is. But you can do it in a way that's kind. Right. So it's not necessarily that the news itself has to be kind,
right,
but the delivery of it has to be kind.
It's all, and she said it's all about the delivery.
Yeah, which is really important. And I think you're right. I think people do like negative. I think actually most people like negative feedback.
Yeah, if it's helping them to do something better, and it's not, you're not being bludgeoned about the head and shoulders.
Right,
you know?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I know for me, when I've been reviewed, I always seize on the negative things. You know, I mean, the positive things, you're always like, I know that. I know that's what I'm doing, but let's see what I need to do better. Yeah. Because we all want to improve, right? So I think that's really good story there.
Good stuff.
Really well written too. So check that one out. All right. Well, we're now less than 3 weeks away. I can't believe it already. Now less than 3 weeks away from the start of spring, which means that things are really kicking into high gear with our partners, the good people over at the Coordinate Metrology Society. Their annual event, the Coordinate Metrology Society Conference, is a gathering place for users, vendors, and researchers in the realm of portable 3D measurement hardware, software, and peripherals. CMSC 2017 occurs July 17th through 21st in the beautiful mountains of Snowbird, Utah, right outside of Park City.
That's finally a fun place.
Well, that's a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. If you have never been there, that's amazing. Well, we like to keep tabs on the happenings of the Coordinate Metrology Society on a regular basis through this, which is the CMSC Corner segment of our show. This is where we chat with some of the movers and shakers in the CMSC, and this time we're very happy to welcome a man who is not only the Society's chairperson, but also the training delivery manager at the National Physical Laboratory in the United Kingdom. I'm talking, of course, about Keith Bevan, who is graciously spending a bit of his Friday evening with us from across the pond. Keith, welcome back to CMSC Corner on Quality Digest Live.
Hello, Mike. Hello, Dirk. How are you?
Pretty good.
Doing great. Well, as I mentioned, there's a lot going on with the Society at the moment, starting with a redesign of your website at www.cmsc.org. So what prompted the change, and what are some of the new features of the site?
Okay, so one of the things we really wanted to improve was to be able to better facilitate our members, give them easier access to various different aspects of the site, such as events, the programs, and then the certification requirements and other things, obviously, as we get closer to the conference. We also wanted to have a really lovely feel from a point of view that it's a global asset for all metrologists. One of the major things that we also wanted to do is to be able to highlight all of the great support that we have from our industry partners and from all of our exhibitors. So it was really crucial and key to give it a complete revamp.
And Keith, one of the things that we all like about the Coordinate Metrology Society is that it's a very tight group, and one of the things you guys really do is you pay attention to feedback from your users. What are some of the changes that have been suggested that we'll maybe see at CMSC 2017?
Okay, so some of the things that we got given to us at the end of last year was one of the issues was about presentations. For example, we had dual tracks. People were not able to see different types of presentations, or two that they wanted to see were on at the same time. So they fundamentally said, could we split it into single tracks? So that's what we've done. We've split it for this year into single tracks. We've extended it to 3 days. We're also looking at rooms for training. So we're going to introduce training events for all week, starting on Monday. So when people come in, they can start to do things straight away. So there's a lot of new things. We're looking at a STEM tent. So really, really key elements that are happening.
And so what about returning activities? I mean, I know that there's always been a lot of popular things that you guys bring back each year because people look forward to them and they anticipate them each year, year to year at the CMSC. You had some really popular and effective events at the show that people are, of course, looking forward to seeing, I think, at CMSC 2017. So I assume we'll see them again in Utah this summer, or what's going on with that?
Yeah, we've not specifically dropped anything, really. What we've done is, obviously, besides food and beverage, which is always a good return, that people like. We've got the measurement zone and the education zone. We've got some new features that will be in there. We'll be doing more. There'll be Jeopardy will be returning. We'll be doing all sorts of best practice type sessions. But we're also going to introduce something called Ask the Experts. So we're going to ask the delegates to pose questions, invite experts into there, and then use an MC to ask quite a few questions, and let's see what happens. Hopefully it will help the delegates with some of their issues.
And that's in the measurement zone where that's the Ask the Expert is happening?
Yes, it is. So it will be inside the exhibit tent, within that area. So it's going to be an interesting feature, I think. Should be a bit of fun as well.
Yeah, that's actually something that came about in the last, I guess, few years, the measurement zone, the education zone, which is now really built. If you haven't been in the CMSC, it's really the focus of the exhibitor hall.
Yeah.
And there's so much activity going on there. It's always really exciting to be there. You guys keep on building that out, which is cool as well, adding new stuff to it. Let me ask you about the white papers, because that's something that I'm really close with, because we do the CMSC Journal of the CMSC, and CMSC World. We always feature white paper presentations in those publications, and they're really highlight of the show each year. But for people who might want to present a paper at CMSC 2017, the deadlines really are coming up quick. So what dates should people be aware of, and how can they learn more about submitting a white paper?
Okay, so the key date at the moment is the 11th of March. That is the date for abstracts to be submitted. And then there's key dates in April that will talk about, obviously, acceptance and so on. But basically, you can go to the CMSC website, so cmsc.org, and then go to Call for Papers, where there is technical guidance, where it gives you a complete list of how to submit an abstract, and then also how to go through the whole process and what will happen. So there's a key element of guidelines there. And as I said, with us having 3 days now with the presentations, we're aiming for quite a number. So we're hopefully into the mid-20s of different types. One of the other issues is we're looking at to try and categorize the presentations as well.
And Keith, I want to. That was something I wasn't aware of this year. I mean, I'm one of those people who's probably given feedback that there are so many good presentations at the CMSC that it has been frustrating sometimes. Like, oh, I want to go to this one, and I want to go to this one, and oh gosh, I have to toss a coin to decide which one I'm going to go to. So I wasn't aware of that. So they're actually they've extended the number of days specifically so that they could do these presentations one at a time.
Yeah, that's the aim. So what it will happen is on the Tuesday when we do the opening, straight after the opening event and the keynote speech, we'll be straight into presentations, and everybody will have the opportunity, including the exhibitors, to actually sit in and listen to all of the presentations. We're trying to keep as many events as we can as separate as possible without overlapping. It's not easy, but we're getting there with the agenda. We're very close to putting an agenda out there for people to see. So in the coming weeks, there'll be lots of news, lots of information, even more about the training, because that's going to be really a new one for us.
So again, the website is www.cmsc.org. People can go there at their leisure and find out a lot more. Well, Keith Bevan, thank you so much for joining us today on Quality Digest Live. We're going to look forward to seeing you again in beautiful Utah in July. It should be a wonderful event and a wonderful place to have that CMSC conference this year. So again, thanks for joining us. Spend a little bit of your Friday afternoon with us, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you. Just doing a bit of large volume measuring.
Oh man, that's mean. That's mean.
Yeah,
Where's my Guinness?
Not quite noon our time yet out here in California.
It's after 5 his time though, so that's okay.
All right, thanks again, Keith. We'll
Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Oh man. We need to do that. We need to have Guinness on the show. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean,
or Sierra Nevada. We got Sierra Nevada.
We got Pabst in the fridge right now.
We got Pabst in the fridge.
I can go bring some. I can bring some out. We can pop it right now. But Keith's a great guy. It's a good show. I mean,
it is a great show. Yeah.
And
I'm glad that they're doing the presentations, because that was frustrating.
We actually didn't drill down too much into what the presentations are all about. But I mean, there's an opportunity for you if you're in academia or in industry to talk about your portable 3D coordinate metrology.
And particularly applications oriented where
laser trackers and articulated arms and photogrammetry,
white light,
a lot of different technologies. So check that out. Again, CMSC.org. Good people, good partner of ours, and check it out for more information.
All right. Well, Mike, as you know,
I was trying to delay this as much as I could. I know this was coming. I was trying to dance around it.
You're holding off on the pain. Okay, so I wrote an editorial this week on made in the USA.
You did actually, really good article on Made in the USA. Thank you, Dirk. Good job. That appeared in yesterday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Really good article.
Well, and one of the things I talked about was people want to buy American, but only if it's a quality product. And one of the things I touched on is that basically manufacturers make what consumers want. And one of the things consumers want, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, they want cheap products.
Yeah.
And they don't want to pay a lot of money for product, or they want to pay what they feel a product is worth. And so that forces manufacturers very often to go overseas so that they can produce a product that their consumers are willing to buy, right?
At the price point they want.
At the price point they want. Now, that's generally what kind of the article was about. There was a really interesting comment from one of our readers, Steve Moore. Steve Moore comments on a lot of our articles. He's really sharp. He says some really interesting things. I want to read you this comment that Steve wrote, if we can put it up on the screen there. Businesses exist first and foremost to make a profit, all caps, not to provide the goods or services that they sell. They make a profit by being cost effective at what they do. And I want to focus on that first bit.
Okay.
Businesses exist first and foremost to make a profit, not to provide the goods and services that they sell. I think that's provocative.
I'm not sure I understand that exactly, though. So what he's saying is they exist to make a profit, but I mean, you only make a profit through having goods and services to sell. Those things are intricately entwined, are they not?
That's what we want to talk about.
Okay, all right,
Thank you for setting that up. I happen to think that's a provocative statement, because I think we forget the first part of that.
Yeah.
It's like, we're in business to make money.
Make money, sure.
We're in business to make money. Whatever we sell, I don't care what we sell. We're in business to make money is basically the way it comes down to.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? How important, or where does that second part of the equation come in? Make goods and products that people want to buy.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also, it depends on the industry partially. You had a off script you sent to me a couple weeks ago about steel industry versus the auto industry today.
Right.
I mean, there's levels of this at which I think there's a responsibility of industry to, well, is there, to support where you're at, the country you're in, the people that work for you. I mean, I think Made in the USA does have a resonance. I think it has a lot of resonance for consumers. I think people do want to, within reason, support that if the deal is a good deal. I don't think people want to, and the other thing is there's levels to this. I mean, it could be made in the USA, but 95% of the products are made in China or in some other country, and it's maybe finally assembled here in the USA, but really it's a foreign made product.
Right.
And if you can even know that as part of the problem sometimes
actually,
too.
this is a whole nother subject. Yeah. Technically, it can't say made in the USA unless it meets a certain
percentage
formula. Right. Yeah, otherwise it can say it's things like assembled and waved at in the USA or whatever. But I guess that was my point is, and I think that was Steve's point, is first and foremost, a company wants to make money.
Sure.
And so they're going to do it based on feeding and feeling what their consumers want. And if their consumers want cheap products, well then, I've got to make cheap products.
Well, here's the thing. Law now says that corporations essentially have personhood, right?
Right.
We've established that. So living entities do what they're going to do. They survive by feeding themselves, growing, replicating, doing all those things. So if you consider an organization, an enterprise, a business, a corporation as a living entity, ultimately they have to make profit. I mean, that's the fuel that fuels their survivability. But do they do that at the expense of everything else? I mean, do you care about labor practices in the countries in which your goods come from, that your supplies come from? I mean, I think you should care about that. I think that there should be a hand in there to say, well, wait a minute, maybe it's the hand of the consumer, to say, maybe I care about that. Maybe I care about learning. And the problem to me is it's not transparent, it's opaque. So you can't really know half the time about the practices. And that's why I feel like some of the regulation rollbacks are not great things, personally, because I think it inhibits transparency into the process, and consumers can make their choice then.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because to me it all, and that's also was kind of the thrust of the article, is in the end, manufacturers do what consumers want. And yes, there's some responsibility, but it's kind of up to the consumers, I think, to push them in that direction. In other words, I just found out that all of your products are made by slave labor. Okay, well, I don't want to buy your products. Well, what happens? Like when that whole expose about Foxconn and all that kind of stuff happened with Apple. Well, all of a sudden Apple's like, whoa, let's do something about this, because we're going to lose market share if we don't do something.
Or did they just hide it better? I mean, this is the part of the argument. I mean, I think back to the 70s. Whenever you read your article, I thought back to the 70s and the whole idea of U.S. auto manufacturers who really were not able to compete with a lot of cars coming over from Japan. I mean, that was an era where people first really started to become conscious of fuel efficiency as a big driving factor of how much they want to pay for a car
and quality.
What kind of car they want, and quality as well. And I mean, that was a big thing. Was that I know a lot of the U.S. auto manufacturers' nameplates tried to do the Made in USA thing as a support for essentially saying, well, we're made in the USA. I know our quality isn't quite as good, and our fuel economy stinks, but we're made in the USA. So pay at that point $11,000 for a car versus $9,000 for a Toyota.
Yeah.
And that was an argument that didn't really carry a lot of water with a lot of consumers. You know, we saw Toyota and Honda and some of the other nameplates really come up very quickly at that time in the 70s and 80s. So ultimately, I think you're right. It's in the hand. I think that's what you're saying. It's in the hands of the consumers to make the decisions, and the companies will follow the consumers, not the other way around.
But it sounds like you're saying that, despite that the companies, even if it's not visible, the companies have got some responsibility to try to behave maybe ethically, using even if the labor's overseas labor, make sure that it's a safe environment and try to keep those things in. Well,
hey, I mean, the companies are, this is the tension. Companies are going to try to not be transparent in a lot of this stuff. And unfortunately, I think there's now a movement towards less and less and less transparency. And in these processes, consumers should know. We should be able to know. We should be able to at least try to know as best we can the status of the stuff we buy. And cradle to grave, what happens to it afterwards too. That's a big part of this too. Not just where it's consumed, not just where it's created, but after it's consumed and used, what happens to it then? Where does it go? I mean, but we have to know. We have to at least be able to find out. And if we're increasingly opaque in this stuff, it's not a good thing, I don't think.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I mean, that's my take on it.
We ate up 5 minutes. That was good.
Well, there you go. Hey, we actually ate up almost 30 minutes, so,
As we usually do. Well, we're going to run short. That never happens. All right. Okay, and that wraps up today's show.
That's right.
But we're gonna play you out today with a short video on leadership that we ran across from Michael Hughes. We forget sometimes what leadership is really about. The strength it takes to be a good leader, an inspirational leader, one who can get out in front of the crowd and break ground and get others to follow him or to follow her. And that's what leadership is all about. And we came across this video. We hope you find this video as thought-provoking and inspirational as we do. Have a good weekend, and so long.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut, and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd, and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers, because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap.